Before Dahmer, before Bundy, before Kemper or Ramirez or Gacy, there was Gein. In 1957, Ed Gein was arrested for the confirmed murders of 2 local Wisconsin women. Having a rap sheet of only 2 murders makes Gein sound almost quote-unquote inferior to his serial killer peers, does it not? I mean, Bundy confessed to the murders of over 30 women, for example. To be tried for only the murder of 2 women seems small in comparison to prolific killers who have prowled across America and starred on multiple true crime podcasts. But Gein is infamous for what he did to the dead bodies of the victims, not how many victims he had. The killing was not his largest crime, as much as the literal objectification that he would do of his female victims, and the dead bodies he would exhume from the local cemetery. Gein's home was decorated with trophies of his crimes, such as human skin chairs, bedposts made of human skulls, a lampshade made of a human face, kitchenware made of human bone, a belt made of a dozen human nipples, an unfinished suit made of female human skin, and much, much more. Police had never seen anything like it. His House of Horrors, as they called it, was so packed with human remains that to this day it is impossible to figure out exactly how many women and girls he tortured and killed. As much as something was able to in the 1950s, Ed Gein's story went viral. Something about Gein captured the American imagination. Perhaps it was the constant American fetishization of violence, especially between World War II and the Vietnam War. Perhaps it was the unimaginable cruelty that had occurred right under law enforcement's nose, proving the incompetency of our supposed protectors. Perhaps it was the fact that this violence was weaponized against white women, as this level of gory exploitation was common towards black women during the height of American slavery, but so rarely was it wielded against the white race in such a way. Whatever it was that made Gein stick to the cultural consciousness, it continues to prevail today, with a multitude of films and television shows being inspired by the unforgettable horrors of things like the nipple belt or the skin lamps. If you've seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre, these choice Gein artifacts don't seem very new, do they? In fact, you might have already seen them with your own eyes, shot on 16mm, using an Eclair NPR. It's no secret that the Gein case heavily inspired the film. Director Tobe Hooper said so himself. No one who has seen the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre could forget the first time we as an audience see the inside of the Sawyer family home. We too become captivated by the dining room covered in skulls and the horrific dead bodies of the Sawyer family grandparents in the upstairs bedroom. That all being said, Texas Chainsaw Massacre does not claim to be about Ed Gein. There's an important distinction here. It is only inspired by Ed Gein. The movie opens with a title card explaining a different true story, actually a fictional true story for the movie to be based on. Despite the fact that this true story is a fake story, there is a truth that runs through the Texas Chainsaw Massacre film that we must face: the true torture of women, true stories of true crime that we continue to exploit in film, and why we do so, and why we want to do so. Let's start with the obvious. Leatherface is obviously inspired by Gein himself. This is not just because of the horrors inside the family home that I have referenced, and this is not just because director Hooper said so, but also because Gein himself had human skin masks, just like the one worn by Leatherface. Gein had a stash of women's clothing that he would wear to assimilate into the position of his dead mother, just like Leatherface. And just like Leatherface, Gein treats the female bodies he slaughters like nothing more than animal meat. He butchered his real kills, just like Leatherface, mimicking the slaughter of cattle. From the start of the movie, there are conversations about methods of killing cattle that are used to set the tone for the kills in the film. The Sawyer family even has a history of working at the local slaughterhouse. "My family's always been in meat," says the hitchhiker, before he describes how to use all the body parts of a farm animal. All of the characters are killed in those slaughterhouse methods, but only Pam is hung and frozen and commodified in a way that mirrors how we package food. Well, who's Pam? In Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we follow a fictional group of young adults on a sunny road trip where the main character, Sally Hardesty, and her brother are going to check in on things involving their extended family and some local grave robbings. A few friends have tagged along, and they end up discovering something more horrible than they can describe. Pam just happens to be one of those friends. In fact, she's the only female friend. Despite being the origin of the final girl trope, one of the things I've always found personally interesting about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre film is that the deaths of men and women are, on a surface level, unequal in a way that benefits women. A cast of a slasher rarely has mostly male murder victims, and this friend group in the movie is mostly male. There are 3 male main characters in the film, and they die in gruesome ways at the hands of our killer, while only 1 woman is killed. But the men die quickly. Their deaths are bloody, but fast. They don't linger on screen the same way that Pam's iconic meat hook killing does. In fact, we go back for seconds with Pam when we find her body in the freezer. Pam is our only on-screen female murder, yet she is the kill of the film. And she is the main kill inspired by Ed Gein himself. For when his house was investigated, police found Bernice Worden decapitated and hung upside down like a dressed deer. This is what makes Texas Chainsaw Massacre truly inspired by a true story. Pam represents the crux of the inspiration for the film, the murder of women like animals. And Pam is blamed for her cattle-like death. The film doesn't say it, but we as an audience know it. In Her Body Himself, Gender in the Slasher Film, Carol J. Clover talks about the difference between the final girls and the other women in horror movies. The other women must exist for the final girl to exist, but the other women are disposable. In the words of Clover, there are certain traits that define a final girl, and Sally Hardesty, our main character, follows them perfectly, which is why she's given the honor of surviving. Sally is the only truly developed female character. She is intelligent, modestly dressed, a bit more on the masculine or androgynous side, and connected in a familial way to someone vulnerable that we can care about. She has a story to tell, because this movie is her story, and we know it because the movie starts with her intentions. Her checking on her family plots, and her family home is the reason there's a movie to begin with. Pam is already framed as excess. Sally is always filmed from respectable angles, and is never leered at by the audience. But there is another girl that must exist in a horror film. You can't just have a horror film full of Sallys. According to Carol J. Clover, the final girl is only one girl. There must be another woman. A different girl must exist. Someone scantily clad, perhaps in red shorts. Maybe she's a little ditzy. Maybe she's super into astrology with bouncy curled hair and visible makeup, who's sexually liberated, who has a boyfriend, someone who acts as a foil to our final girl, the girl that deserves to die, so that the final girl can deserve to live. Pam commits the crime of being this other woman, commits the crime of femininity, and therefore, she must be executed. Pam's death, and therefore, Bernice Worden's death, continues to influence the entire horror genre to this day. Maybe you'll remember the scene where Kirk gets bonked on the head with a hammer, like the cattle. Maybe you'll remember the way that Franklin's body is sawed in half as he screams. But you'll never be able to escape the imagery of Pam and what she symbolizes for the entire movie's inspiration. Video games like Dead by Daylight use her meat hook death as a final kill mechanic during multiplayer rounds. Animatronics of her dangling body are sold at Spirit Halloween. Most people don't even know Pam's name unless they're a superfan, and they definitely don't know Bernice Worden's. They probably only know Pam as Meat Hook Girl. This animal-like death, the only on-screen woman death in this film, is one of the defining moments of the entire horror genre. And it doesn't shock me that her death happens as she goes back into the horror house to check on her boyfriend. Because again, the film subconsciously blames Pam. In When the Woman Looks by Linda Williams, she says that one of the developing changes of horror films at the time was the quote-unquote deepening of the woman's responsibility for the horror that endangers her. Pam goes back into the house. Pam trespasses to find her boyfriend, and Pam doesn't fight back, and Pam lacks your sympathy and becomes only a spectacle. On the contrary, Notice how Sally never looks back until she's safe. She knows when to look back, and Pam does not. Pam is clouded by womanhood, and Sally is motivated by a pseudo-manhood that allows her to live. Pam dies like meat. Sally lives like a human. How often do we hear this in the real world, this blaming of the woman for her demise? How often is a woman blamed for her own tragedies? Do you think the police in the 1950s asked what Bernice Worden was wearing? Part of me hopes they didn't. And correlation is not causation, but I know how police work. Ed Gein being the inspiration for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and specifically the inspiration for Pam's death, adds a whole new layer for women in horror and how society views the female body as meat, and then what we can do to that female body, since it is meat. Killers like Gein, and Bundy and Kemper and so on, are infamous because of their cruelty against the female body. From the sorority girl bite mark that Bundy fans get tattooed on their ass cheeks to honor him, to the female skin suit being replicated in horror movie after horror movie to pay homage to Gein, we treat this violence as if it is fantastical. Whenever Halloween rolls around, you will see gifs and clips and trailers of Pam's death cut in new and sexy ways, but the men's deaths are not fun or iconic. They are just deaths. They have the privilege of simply being dead. From the hanging to the freezer, the audience is oversaturated in Pam's torture, but the men's deaths are forgettable. In the real world, we are faced over and over with deaths like Pam's. The sad truth is that it's real. It's not a unique horror, it is a uniquely relatable horror. That's why Texas Chainsaw has a franchise of sequels, and remakes, and sequels to the remakes, all with meat hook kills repeated over and over. It strikes a chord with those who know this violence far too well, with fellow women, which is why we turn this violence into fictional violence. This chord that it strikes expands into the fascinating way that women specifically interact with these stories, and why we make stories like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Women's interest in the dark and terrible has been pushed aside for centuries, typically dismissed with critics claiming that women don't know what's good for them. The books are going to poison the women's minds. The women are asking to be treated like garbage because they like reading something weird. You've heard it before. You've seen people criticizing book talk. From the origins of the Byronic heroes and the origins of dark romances, from Pamela to Miss Bella, women have constantly been criticized by the taboo interest that they have in their own demises. This includes films such as Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Leatherface, like all fictional slashers, has his fangirls who yearn for a taste of his gross skin mask lips. He's tall. There are horror erotica stories written by women, for people who want to be on that meat hook like Pam was, who find pleasure through the pain of watching girls live through a woman's worst nightmare. This seems off-putting or confusing, especially if this is new to you, until you begin to unpack women and women's trauma through the hedonic model of human pleasure. The hedonic model of pleasure argues that pleasure and pain are the same. Humans are complex, nuanced, and humans seek pain and pleasure in equal measure because it makes us feel infinitely less alone. It's safe to explore extreme emotions, such as soul-crushing fear, through different unique fictional experiences. It can help us process those fears, and the fears we've already lived, to become stronger on the other side. It creates a form of community. In Aaron Smuts' The Paradox of Painful Art, he ponders why people seek out media that scares them or makes them sad. He questions why people laugh during horror films, or why people eagerly rewatch movies with tragic endings, knowing that they're going to cry. To conclude his argument, he writes, "I argue that the motive for seeking out painful art is complex. But what we desire from such art is to have experiences on the cheap, not life experience on the cheap, as one theory puts it, but experiences of strong emotional reactions. Art safely provides us the opportunity to have rich emotional experiences that are either impossible or far too risky to have in our daily lives. We can feel fear without risking our lives, pity without seeing our loved ones suffer, thrills without going to jail, and a variety of other experiences that usually come with unwelcome pitfalls. We can feel the fear on an artificial level, from the comfort of our couch, from our bed, and we can explore what the collective trauma of womanhood and cruelty against women has done to us, our desires, our hesitancies, and our futures. We can unpack our pasts and find fellowship in our newfound liberation. Women want to feel like Sally does, laughing her head off as the sun rises on her blood-covered face as she escapes to safety, but we know that, sadly, there is a higher chance of us being like Pam, dragged screaming to our cruel fates by a man double our size. So we explore the pain and process it through movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We take control of our trauma, and our narratives, and our reactions to those narratives. Ed Gein was a real man. His real kills inspired fictional movies, where fictional women die on meat hooks like real women did. And Ed Gein's disgusting nightmare farmhouse is something that has created a new fear in women, a new fear that permeated around the world that we now explore through fiction, through movies. And this is where the balance of exploitation and catharsis comes into play. Where's the line between Pam's body being sold on shelves every October for men to laugh at versus a woman who cosplays Pam to a convention to feel less alone in her sexual assault trauma? Are both forms of catharsis? I would argue, yes, both in a way. Fiction is a safe space to explore all things terrible, frightening, and beautiful. In a way, all fiction is catharsis, whether or not you consider it tasteful. But when it comes to Pam specifically, we can't tell her story without telling Gein's. And there lies the rub. Joseph Jonghyun Joen, borrowing words from Harper White, says that historiography is invariably the work of construction rather than discovery. Thus, any historical account is as reflective of the historian's perspective as it is of the events or phenomena that she or he describes. Gein was a man, and the director of Chainsaw Massacre was a man, and so a man is recording the real history of Bernice Worden through the fictional history of Pam. And this is where I think the eye of the beholder, the intention of the creator, is very important. I don't think any creator should have to disclose their personal traumas in order to justify making something weird, wacky, and horrific. But I am saying it's important to analyze who could be telling the story and why. All the stories have a right to exist, but they're not all free from criticism. I do not have all the answers for where to find the balance between exploitation and catharsis. That's a bigger question that scholars have been asking themselves for decades. But I will leave you with some anecdotes from after the Texas Chainsaw Massacre's release so you can make your own decision. In 1977, film critic Mary Mackey described Pam's death scene as the most brutal on-screen female death in any commercially distributed film. In one psychology study held after the release of the film, which was investigating gender-specific perceptions of slasher films, one male participant described the screaming, especially Sally's, as the most freaky thing in the film. Not the murders of women, but their fear at being murdered. That's what scared him. The actress who played Pam, Terry McMinn, continues to this day to pose with meat hooks for photos, and talks fondly about filming the meat hook scene, calling it profound. But McMinn also speaks about how the director and cinematographer of the film essentially tricked her and forced her into filming the famous red short walking scene. The first day she ever showed up for a table reading to see the full script, they told her to come in short shorts. McMinn is quoted as saying that it made her feel icky. She also said that Tobe Hooper was a very bad communicator until she was able to prove herself acting in the meat hook scene, which just so happened to be one of the first ones they filmed. Despite all of this, when asked about the overall experience playing Pam, McMinn says that she is grateful every single day and considers the film groundbreaking and magical.